Well, it looks like we've reached 4,000 subscribers, and by the time this is coming out, it's going to be much greater than that. So thank you all for sticking around at the channel. I never thought more than 20 people were interested in what I had to say. Anyways, in last week's video, I made the offhand comment about iOS 7 being more liquid glass than liquid glass. And I'm not exactly the first to make this comparison. It's pretty clear. Matt Birchley wrote about this in June of 2025. His article's only about 3 paragraphs long, and he makes some good points, but in this video, I really want to delve in and compare side-by-side screenshots of liquid glass, iOS 7, and iOS 6. We are going to try to find an answer to this question. Was iOS 6 or 7 more liquid glass than liquid glass? As per usual, thank you members, and if you want to check out the community, then join the Discord, links in the description. With iOS 6 and 7, something was very different about these two updates. One of these was truly unified. Johnny Ive was the designer of both the software and hardware, so yes, this was a unified style between the two realms. Liquid Glass, on the other hand, came out in 2025 with the 26 OS lineup, which is easier to say than listing off all the different types of operating systems that Apple has right now. But for those not in the loop, it's mainly macOS, iPadOS, and iOS. iOS 26 really is the spotlight of today's video. It's okay. At first it was all nice in the photos when the betas were coming out. What I'm saying is it was novel and interesting looking. The usual reaction to seeing something new and something that's been otherwise stale and bland for the last decade. It ends there, however, since besides some questionable UI changes mostly in the Apple Music app, it's really the same OS for the most part, with some new textures and effects slapped on. One of the examples I forgot about until coming back to the script was how weird the iPhone app was at launch. Like, this is one of the worst design changes in recent memory. I don't want to get into it here since this isn't a video about the failures of the GUI. So we might as well start with the first thing you see when you turn on the iPhone. The old slide to open screen, which really isn't in that anymore, but it's pretty good. It's a pretty good look for both of them, honestly. I think we can all agree on that. These are clearly two distinct styles, and they both accomplish the goals for their style. iOS 6 is achieving that late-stage aqua aesthetic very well, and iOS 7 is achieving a transparent and thin design style that we can already see here is somewhat like liquid glass. These two squares on the wallpaper are selectively transparent, bringing out a yellow from the square on the left when it's under the right side square. If we were to slide, we now be at the apps page, and this is where some real differences start to show. There's a lack of drop shadows on iOS 7, something that removes a lot of the depth from the image here. You may have noticed that in all my videos, I put drop shadows on literally every element on screen so that there's some depth, giving the illusion of 3D, or that these images are situated above the backgrounds in a fake virtual reality. This isn't really a thing on iOS 7, but it kinda is. Granted, the drop shadows on iOS 6 were small and not very pronounced, but this little addition of depth goes a long way in making it feel more real. The dock too, since it gives the illusion of a 3D object on the screen, with the drops and reflections adding to the sense of depth. These reflections are pretty common with Apple design at this time as well, and I'm pretty sad that this element is gone. It would have been very nice to have this in liquid glass, given the fact that it's glass and it reflects, but who knows why that's not here today. It would be a joke not to mention the overall change from the hyperrealism to the flatter, minimal take on the skeuomorphic genre of icons that they all fit into. All of these still represent something in the real world. Moving on to the phone app, we can see the move from mimicking a real numpad of a telephone to the simpler digital one. But this is iOS 26's. And I can't help but say that this is a total step back from what we had before. These buttons are assumed to take on the new liquid glass style, coming with it the light refractions on the borders, but it doesn't seem to have them to our eyes since the background is also white. There doesn't even seem to be a hint at the general light refraction on the corners, where glass bends light, separating the wavelength. Maybe each of these buttons should have a very, very, very slight drop shadow. Not like the one it has, but maybe a very faint spectrum of visible light at the corners, since glass would do that. Also, check out the battery in the iOS 7 photo. This is maybe the 6th or 8th video in a row where that number has appeared in my video unintentionally. Moving over to settings, the margins today fit more of that iOS 6 style, but with the flatness of iOS 7. It seems like the designers were very indecisive of what to do here. It would be foolish to try to make the settings quote-unquote pretty, since this is where the important stuff lies. If you're trying to change something on the phone, like the god-awful effects slowing it down, then you would want the settings to be coherent enough to read. But Apple didn't exactly do that. There exists at least one settings page that is comically stylized, almost to the point of confusion, sticking out like a sore thumb. And many of you already know what this is, but it's the action button page. Why is this the way it is? This could have just been a drop-down menu, and it makes little sense to me that the rest of the settings are not this stylized, and exist just to quickly be able to change the settings. Almost like what a settings app is supposed to be. The weather app is another interesting one. Much like the settings, it's a mix between iOS 6 and iOS 7. We have the rounded corners from iOS 6 and the layout of iOS 7. What about this is like glass? None of it here, actually. I'd argue this is one of the rare moments where iOS 6 actually looks more impressive visually than liquid glass. The panel the weather rests on here actually looks like a piece of glass, with slight light refractions on the ends and all. Even stranger, the weather app has elements of liquid glass in it, and we can tell this by looking at the close window button up top. I believe this is native to the OS now instead of just being inside the app. That same asset is reused all over the OS and is probably a part of the SDK or something now. I don't really know development, so I don't know these terms. Mail is another case of no glass here, just a mix of iOS 6 margins and curves and iOS 7's flatness. Is liquid glass anything? iOS 7 had a style and iOS 6 had a style. It's clear by looking at both of them side by side. iOS 26 doesn't seem to have a style, and is just picking blindly from the last two major styles of iOS. Apple's website calls iOS 26 a new look, even more magic. This can be believed by someone who was born yesterday, who doesn't remember pre-iOS 7. To my audience, and the majority of the people who care about this stuff, this reads like a lie. It's not a new style, it's clearly a mashup of the previous two. Can full transparency really be called new? PNG images have been able to do this since 1996, the same year of the Nintendo 64, System 7.5.3, and the NeXT acquisition. macOS icons have been able to support full transparency since macOS 10, ironically. Yeah, to go on a side tangent, macOS kinda messed up icons at first when the update first dropped, and other apps still don't work properly. Handbrake is one of my favorite examples of this. Yeah, so it used to be a unique icon, but now it's inside a box. The iPhone also has transparent icons, and they have the effect of refracting and reflecting the light somewhat, but it's really just a bulge filter with scale turned up to the max. I can do the same thing in Apple Motion. The slight levels of customization that Apple lets us have with the transparent icons are nice. Granted, this still isn't a lot of customization, and the liquid glass meter from the first beta 2 release was nerfed a lot so phones wouldn't die while running it. For a very small amount of time on social media, there were these videos of people taking Frutiger Aero style wallpapers and blending them with liquid glass in the early betas to make something very reminiscent of Vista or Windows 7. Although Windows 7 and Vista were not as obnoxious as this, I used Windows in school when I was a kid, and it wasn't until around, 2017 when the school computers were actually finally updated to Windows 10. And I never remember it looking this obnoxious. Looking at older screenshots too, it was not at this extreme. These 2 screenshots of Vista, for example, yeah, there is a lot of transparency, and there's a general theme of nature and underwater, like in the widgets, but it wasn't this obnoxious that we see today, and distracting. Vista, in my opinion, was good looking and usable. I don't know how true this is in practice, I never got to use it much. Now don't take this as an attack on the Frutiger Aero aesthetic, since I think it looks very good at times, and I do appreciate the style. It just doesn't need to be put on everything, much like minimalism, aqua-esque morphism, Bauhaus, or any other specific style of design. There should be some variety. Going back to iOS screenshots, Calculator is another example of just adding circles to the design styles of iOS 7. Now, granted, liquid glass was not the first to do this, and it would be very dishonest of me to claim that it did. So I went to Google and looked up iOS 8 screenshots. Then I looked at 512 if Stephen Hackett had already archived screenshots, and he didn't. So I went back to Google and looked up iOS 9 screenshots. You can see where I'm going with this. iOS 13 was the first version that I saw that I could really point to and say, I can't exactly tell when this came out, and it looks very similar to liquid glass, minus of course the liquid glass. Liquid glass really isn't that special. What it is when boiled down is like a Minecraft shader. It's a shader on top of the post-iPhone 10 iOS design style, where Aqua was more like a beta smooth lighting, very charming and still holds up today, and iOS 7 was that interesting in-between area, like Minecraft 1.6 or 1.9. Overall, this wasn't a very super in-depth look at the case, only 3 or 4 really good examples, and I encourage you all to also take a look at it, and let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on this, since I like to hear some more opinions. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and until next time, goodbye.